Welcome back. It's episode 14 of the Emotional Bankroll podcast, a series where I interview DFS pros about the mental health and lifestyle of playing DFS for a living. You may have the financial means to go pro, but do you have the emotional bankroll to deal with the highs and lows? Welcome, I'm Brian Jester, and in today's episode, I chat with Eric Thiel, who you may know as etphonehome on DraftKings. Eric is primarily a college football and college basketball specialist with several six-figure scores under his belt as a DFS pro. I chatted with Eric about what it's like to graduate university and immediately roll into becoming a full-time DFS pro, why he specializes in college football and where the edges lie in niche sports, his reasoning for staying off the RotoGrinders leaderboards, what it's like to be a young guy and work all day every Saturday in the fall while your friends are out going out and partying, and how he combats that burnt out feeling while grinding. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to the channel, get notified when any new interviews are released, or you can subscribe in your favorite podcast app. And if you like it, give us a thumbs up. And if you have any guests that you'd want to hear from, whether it's you personally that have a story or there are DFS pros that you would like to hear on this show, hit me up on Twitter at BrianJesterFF to let me know. Let's get into it. All right, let's bring him in. Let's talk to Eric, who is now our second consecutive guest from north of the border. Eric, what's up, dude? How's it going?
It's doing well. I'm good. How are you?
Good, man. I appreciate you coming on the show. I know you don't do shows very often, if ever. So I'm super thrilled to get your story and talk to you.
Yeah, man. This is my first one, so it's a little weird putting myself out there like this. But no, I'm excited and like big fan of the show. I think talking about some of this stuff is something that not a lot of people in the space do, and so yeah, big fan.
Well, I'm happy this show was your first foray into the podcast scene. So again, I appreciate that. And like you mentioned, there are some guests on this show that are in the public spotlight and a lot of people know their stories, but we do have some guests like you who many people don't know much about. So the first place we should start is your background and your DFS history to give people some context as to who you are. So Eric, when did you first get into DFS and how did you hear about it?
Yeah, so I was just in university. I played sports growing up, basically just a typical college kid. Was playing fantasy football. Probably got caught in the advertising blitz in, I think my first sort of like year was 2016 of DFS, which I think would have lined up with that big when DraftKings had ads on every single game and every single channel. And basically was like, oh, I play fantasy football. I'll throw $10 in, and that's kind of how it started. So
cool. So you were in university when this happened. You actually graduated university just a couple of years ago. So you're one of the younger guests that we've had on the show. In university, what was your major? And you've been doing DFS full time for most of these past couple of years. What was your major, and have you had any real jobs outside of DFS?
Yes, I majored in economics, and I think econ, and specifically you take econometrics, which that was sort of my introduction to R. And that's kind of really where I took off on applying stats to sports and like sort of building on all of that. So yeah, I graduated in the spring of 2019. So fairly recently. As for like real jobs, essentially after I graduated, I consulted for a CFL team, which was just like kind of a fun bucket list experience. And then at the end of 2020, I worked on a startup with one of my friends for about 2 months, maybe. But yeah, essentially, I would say from my like last year of university up until essentially now, I've been full-time DFS, and that's really been the only job I've kind of had. So.
I mean, that's super sweet, right? To be able to say that you're doing that full time after college. And so you're an econ major, you did some stats, you worked in R. Some guests on this show said that their major hasn't helped them in DFS. Some say it's obviously dramatically helped them. I assume you're on that latter side where, yeah, econ and statistics and programming certainly helps out what you do in DFS. How big of a part would you say that your university career has played a part in your success in DFS?
It's kind of interesting because I feel like as I was coming out of university, maybe I was just a little bit cynical, and it was like, well, like, I got this degree, but now I'm doing my own thing, and like this didn't help me. But now, like looking back on it, you learn lots about different problem solving. Obviously, it's sort of an intro to stats, which then I sort of ran with on my own. And so it's, I think it kind of got me to start on things. But then after that, there was a lot of self-taught stuff and, reading different papers and learning just different skills. So yeah, I would say somewhere in the middle of it helped me or it completely didn't help me. So
Yeah, that's fair. All right, so you graduate 2019. Were you immediately looking for a job, or were you already in the full swing of DFS things that you were like, all right, I'm just going to continue doing this? And along that note, when did you start playing DFS seriously, and when did you gain confidence that you could do it full time?
yeah, so when I graduated, sort of coming out of university, my plan was to continue full time. I sort of considered myself like my last semester. I had 3 classes to finish, and so I basically was playing full time at that point. But really, so the summer of 2018, that was kind of when I guess built everything. I won a 70K on NBA playoffs, which I guess was a little bit before the summer. Rolled that. I played WNBA in the summer. There was World Cup that year, which I put some together for and did really well. And then obviously college football. So like sort of by the time 2018 rolled around, I was playing pretty seriously. And then, so I guess before that, 2017, I looked back at my road tracker, and WNBA was really like the thing that built my bankroll, which is kind of crazy. I looked, and I have to brag a little bit, but I was at 100% ROI on 6,500 entries, which is absolutely insane. Looking back, I didn't feel like that, I guess. I didn't really remember. But yeah, and then just, won some bigger stuff in NBA. And so kind of by the time I'd graduated, I had felt like I had been full time, and I was just kind of happy to continue in doing that.
So you have the 70K hit in NBA playoffs. I assume that was your biggest hit to date. But before that, though, what was your biggest hit, and what was your reaction to winning 70K?
Yeah, I mean, the reaction to 70K was crazy. Actually, it was Ricky Rubio, who I bought his jersey. Like, I'm one of those guys to commemorate it. So I remember that. I mean, obviously insane. Like, I think I actually had a final to write the next day. And so it's like you go, yeah, like, you win 70K on NBA, and then you're waking up the next morning to go to a final, which is a little humbling. But yeah, I don't know. I don't remember like specifically. Obviously, I'm very excited and everything, but nothing crazy. And like before that, yeah, like I said, WNBA, there were a couple. I was looking at my road tracker. There were a couple like 15K wins, 10K wins, which I mean, at that point, I would have been extremely excited with. So
Sure. So, all right. So you win the 70K. You're excited about that. You go to class, you take your final, and now you're back to reality. What was your thought process with that 70K? Was it, okay, now I have a legitimate sum of money to create a bankroll and to do this really seriously? Did you take some money out? I guess what was your thought process on what you could do after winning that, and what was your contest selection and bankroll management like after that hit?
Right. Yeah. I don't like. I was kind of trying to think about this, and I don't remember 100%. I know it was kind of the start of like, okay, I can do this well. I can do this seriously. Probably bumped sort of what I was playing from that. You're in college, like I was in university still at that point, so it's not like you have a ton of bills to pay or people like relying on you. And so for the most part, it just kind of, I was like, okay, I have this, like, let's put this to use. Let's bump up what I'm playing a little bit and just kind of keep it rolling. So
That's sweet. So since then, you've had 6-figure wins in 3 different sports. You've had some 50K wins in college football and college basketball. One of those 6-figure wins came in League of Legends DFS, which honestly is where I recognized your username from the most. And this always interests me just because of the dynamic of the sports disappearing, COVID, esports coming into the forefront. Were you into esports or League of Legends specifically pre-COVID?
no, not at all. I watched a little bit of Counter-Strike. That was my esport that I kind of followed a little bit, but league, like I had no clue what was going on. And I mean, it was just one of those things. And I don't know if it's the same with you, but they started putting out these contests where they're just massive with all the sports closed down. And it's like, I guess. And, I've always felt pretty good about my ability to kind of adapt to a new sport like that and sort of figure it out pretty quickly. And so, yeah, league was just another thing where it's like, hop in. Korean baseball, I played that too, which was so yeah. Those are wild times. Just like, I don't know, even the lock times. It was obviously like in the morning lock, or Korean baseball is like 3 a.m. You're setting an alarm before bed and like falling asleep, then waking up, staring at your computer, going back to sleep. Like just not the healthiest thing of all time.
It was wild. Setting alarms in the middle of the night is not healthy, first of all, but to get up and immediately jump on the screen, I know a lot of people had that same pattern. So that was just crazy. And I'm kind of glad to hear that you were in that same boat as well.
Yeah, no, it was wild. But yeah, no, the league 100K was pretty cool.
There weren't many 100K to first prizes. So which contest was that? And was that LPL, LCK, or was it North American?
I believe it was LPL LCK. It was like a $15, one of the flagships. And actually, I remember waking up and I think I had like an underdog team, and that was it in the last game. And so I basically needed the underdog to go 2-0 in whatever, and like obviously not get too many kills, and that's what makes League kind of a fun sweat. And they did it. It's like, I just won 100K on League of Legends. Like, well, what the hell? So yeah, definitely a cool time. But I mean, also, you think back to setting the alarms and everything, and it's like, yeah, I don't really want to go back to that. But
yeah, I'm with you. I was glad that regular sports returned. I do wish esports prizes were bigger these days, just because of the edge that we utilize. But yeah, there are lots of sports to play. And you recently told me that you started to scale back on a lot of these other sports just to focus on college football and college basketball. Why is that?
I know that I can do college football and college basketball well. I feel like my edges are strong there, and spreading myself too thin in stuff like NBA is just, I don't know, you can kind of see the writing on the wall a little bit. And I always feel like I'd rather be out maybe a season too early versus a season too late. And yeah, just, I mean, in general, everything is getting sharper. And I feel like if you can't dedicate the time to it or like improve on it, you might as well just kind of get rid of it. And also, like, I guess even just lifestyle wise, NBA is just an absolute grind of a season. And so, like, yeah, to be able to kind of leave that behind and be happy where I'm at, I think is a bit of a luxury, and just focus on the stuff that I know I'm good at, extremely confident in.
And that's a super sharp approach. And if a lot of my recent conversations on podcasts on this show have revolved around edges in niche sports. So you talk about the 100% ROI in WNBA that year. Now you're talking about focusing on college football, college basketball. And again, whatever you're willing to share, I know there are a lot of things that most people don't want to publicize here, but what is it about these niche sports that you think gives you such a big edge? Obviously, there's the information factor that you have to really grind the news and bug people on Twitter for some of the information. But I also imagine it plays a part in there's not much modeling going on in these sports. I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think gives you the biggest edge in those spots.
Yeah, so I think, in general, a sport can kind of have three edges, where there's a projection edge, there's a game theory edge, and then there's the information edge, like you talked about. And I think, some of these sports like college football, college basketball, they can still have all three of those edges in place, where it's like you have the information, obviously the modeling edge with usually the more successful players ignoring these sports, and then game theory edge as well. And so I think if you sort of push all those together, it kind of creates a perfect storm of there's a good edge here. It's a little bit annoying because obviously the information edge, it's like you're madly searching through Twitter trying to figure out if this receiver on like Nebraska is playing, versus in the NFL where they're putting out just like a very thorough injury report. So it's a little bit annoying in that way, but also, as you're searching through, like, oh, I'm gaining an advantage here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the biggest things. And you talk about the main sports, NBA, MLB, NFL, NHL, even PGA to an extent. Do you think any of those three areas of edges you described still remain in those sports? Or do you think that, and not necessarily that the edge has completely diminished, that they're just significantly smaller in all of those areas?
I would say smaller. Uh, Golf, I feel like is. I almost feel like golf is impossible. I don't know if that's real or not, but I can't imagine beating Rake in golf with how the lineups are and everything. And same thing. Like I've tried to play NFL. I've lost to NFL, which it's just I don't know. There's less edge to gain there, I think, and you really have to be working hard to get there.
Real quick, CFL, right? So you work for a CFL team. I know you have a CFL stats website. Do you play CFL
Yeah.
DFS, or is the juice not worth the squeeze there?
The juice really isn't worth the squeeze. I bet on CFL pretty consistently and heavily, but for the most part, you get like one contest at the start of the year where it's like, oh, it's opening, like kickoff, and then after that, they just become really small. So
you get your one shot per season to win 50K.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's probably more like 10K, but
Oh, even worse. Okay.
Yeah, it's just the Canadian, and it'll probably be worse this year too because Ontario got rid of DFS. So yeah.
Do you worry about that coming to Saskatchewan or any of the other provinces?
A little bit, yeah. Initially when FanDuel sort of halted their stuff in Ontario, I had like a 3-day sort of like thing where I was like, if DFS like got banned in Saskatchewan, like would I move somewhere else? So it was something that I considered. I didn't really reach an answer, but it's definitely something in the back of my mind where it's like, if college football season rolls around and like Saskatchewan is banned, like what do you do? Definitely something in the back of my mind, which I never kind of felt like could happen. And then it's like Ontario, it's just gone. So
that's such an interesting question. And I think obviously you're younger. I don't know your lifestyle situation. We'll get to those questions here in a bit, but there's a lot of things to think about there, right? If you're willing to move for this career, and we see other people in other careers, they move for their jobs. This just sounds crazier to people who have quote unquote normal jobs, right? That you would move for DFS. But hopefully that it doesn't come to that for you. And another thing I want to ask you about, Eric, is you've kept your name off the RotoGrinders rankings and leaderboards and are a self-described ghost. What is the reasoning for just that secrecy?
Yeah, early on, I felt like I really wanted to protect my edge, and I would say like over cautious in terms of what I was putting out there and that sort of stuff, and just to try and draw the least attention as possible to myself, where it's like, oh, like, who are the good college basketball players or who are the good whatever players, they're not studying your lineups or whatever. And so that was kind of how it started. And also I think a little bit the RotoGrinders leaderboards, and I haven't sort of fleshed this idea out completely, but I think they almost put a little bit of pressure on you where that's just like another leaderboard to like track and follow, where it's like, okay, even when I don't have contests going and I'm not looking at a leaderboard, like there's another leaderboard that, I'm paying attention to and I'm sort of worried about. And so, just, I don't know, to be able to, close my laptop, not think about it, really appealed to me. And even to just like talking to people, I didn't want it to become my like identity, I guess, tell people about what I do and everything.
I've never actually talked to anyone who has talked about that, but I actually feel the same way as far as the rankings go. Whereas, especially if you're public facing, right? Like you run a site, you work for a site, you're a big DFS personality. Obviously, people can look at that and how much other pros factor that in or think about that. I haven't heard it talked about too much, but there is that pressure there because, especially once you start to experience some success, and we know that the RotoGrinders rankings are mostly volume based. you can get in your head, right? You get a win, you're like, wow, I could be the top ranked player in this sport, but that means I got to play more volume. So let me increase my contest allocation here, right? And it can become a negative effect there. So I totally get what you're saying. And yeah, I mean, props to you for keeping your name off there for so long and still off there for that matter.
Yeah, no, yeah, I feel like it's a little bit weird, and like I said, I think I went a little bit too far in that way, where it's like I didn't want to talk to other people playing DFS, and then you're kind of like in your own spot. But yeah, definitely, like I think that the pressure thing makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. So all right, let's continue on this pressure and negative angle, because so far we've only talked about your highs. We haven't talked about any lows. So let's talk about handling swings. And we mentioned the 6-figure wins, the 5-figure wins, but what about when you're losing? Eric, do you have a process when you're in a bankroll valley, or any tips or tricks in dealing with significant losing streaks? And as an extension of that, you've been doing this full time now, pretty much since you graduated university. Were there any low moments for you where you were like, okay, maybe I need to give this up and get a real job?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, for the first part of your question, I think I just become more detail oriented when I'm losing, and so I'll sort of dive deeper into, individual lineup construction or player exposure compared to other players, or just the field in general. See if is there a 35% owned guy that I never even had on my radar and wasn't getting any of. And so just more of that deeper dives into what I'm doing. And then also I'll look at models, I'll look at data sources just to make sure that there isn't an easy fix there that has ruined something, or there's a formula wrong somewhere or whatever. But yeah, that's definitely something that I'll do when I'm losing. And when you're winning, you're just less likely to be like, oh, let me dive into my lineup.
Do you do that when you're winning, or is that just completely off the radar?
Not really. No, it's mostly losing when I'm really diving deep into some of the detail stuff. But yeah, and I guess for the second part of your question, I've definitely had moments where it's like I need to get a real job. If I'm on a 2-week downswing, I'll be like, I wonder what the job market looks like.
Only 2 weeks. That's all it takes.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I know that at some point there's an expiration date, and so I think it's somewhat healthy to just be like, oh, okay, if this isn't working, I know that I can go somewhere else and sort of figure it out. But I've never truly needed to follow up and be like, okay, I'm applying to this job and everything. But it is, I don't know, it's I think kind of cathartic in a way to just okay, let me look at these jobs.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll talk about that expiration date here in a little bit, because I do want to talk about the future towards the end of the show. But for now, let's talk about your lifestyle. I think a lot of people are interested in what it's like to, one, be so young and do this, but two, just to be a DFS pro. There are varying schedules, varying routines that people have. So curious to get yours. Right now, we're recording this in May. So there's no college football, no college basketball. What does a typical work day look like for you now?
So right now, I started with SaberSim in November. So this summer, just working for them full time, which has been great. And kind of to what I was talking about, there's lots of smart people that I get to solve problems with and have dialogue with, which has been a crazy change compared to the last 3 or 4 years, where it's basically just me writing my own code and doing stuff on my own. So it's been really nice. And yeah, so you mentioned the CFL website, still working on that when I can. And then for college football and college basketball specifically, at the end of a season, I always sort of write a debrief of things I noticed, improvements that I want to make. Maybe it's a data source I want to add or something like that. And then just sort of throughout the summer, whenever I have the chance to plug some of those holes, I'll do that.
Okay, I have a lot of follow-up questions here. So for this debrief that you write at the end of each season, I think that's incredibly smart. Is this a lengthy document, or is it just maybe a half page of just some notes?
I would say usually it's closer to half a page. Usually it's something it won't necessarily be the most data driven, where it's oh, I felt like I was stacking quarterbacks wrong, or this certain type of quarterback I was stacking incorrectly, or just different lineup construction things that I noticed, stuff like that, where it's like, okay, here's kind of a starting point, and then I can dig deeper into it. And just kind of stuff like that. So more just like a general, like, let me not forget about this in 2 months, and then I can come back to it and sort of figure it out.
Right. Is that something you've always been doing, or is it just more recently you've been doing that?
I would say more recently, and I think just, I don't know, especially in the last maybe 2 years, I've really felt like every year you need to upgrade a little bit and upgrade a little bit, and so this just kind of helps me to, take some of the stuff that I've learned through the season, where you can't necessarily implement a fix in 7 days before the next slate, and be able to kind of plug that leak or build something new in over the summer.
Yeah, totally fair. And then going back to SaberSim, was that something you sought out? Because so many guests on this show have talked about the value they see in the community of speaking with like-minded people, learning from those people, commiserating with those people through ups and downs. Is that something you sought out, or how did that job materialize?
Yeah, so I met Matt, the founder, like a while back in sort of my DFS career, and so we had been friends for a long time before this, and he, I've talked to him about a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of lifestyle and that sort of stuff, and so I was just kind of explaining where I was at and everything, and that's kind of how it got started, and he sold me on the people and everything, and basically through Matt, who's the founder.
Cool. I mean, that's awesome. So, all right, let's fast forward now. Let's go to the fall when we have college football in swing. College basketball starts, November-ish, right? And that's a pretty busy time for you. So what does your schedule look like then compared to now?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely long, especially for college football. Like the Saturdays, there's 30 games or however many across everything. And with kind of a smaller sport like that, I always want to push every slate. And so like I'll play every single showdown slate, and I'll play the afternoon stuff, and I'll play the night stuff. And like, so Saturdays are crazy, which it's basically you just grind for Saturday, and obviously Friday you're doing like targets and everything. Everything becomes centered around Saturday, and you go through this big long day, get to Sunday, and it's like just you're absolutely wiped, and then just kind of do it over and do it over. So very long days. I try to stay pretty like, I don't know, I'm a little bit fanatical about how much I'm sleeping like in season and trying to get good sleeps in. The last couple of years I've cut alcohol in season, which is just another thing where it's like when I wake up on Saturday, or if there's a slate on a Thursday night, like I want to be at my best.
That's interesting. One, that's dedication. I think a lot of people couldn't have. And if you just think about it, right? Like, especially maybe not fresh out of college or in college, right? Maybe you go out drinking the night before work, right? But if you're 40, 35, I don't know, whatever, you have a legitimate corporate job, right? You're not going out getting drunk the night before and trying to check in to work the next day at 8 a.m., right? It really doesn't happen that often. If you do, there are some issues there. But for you to take that dedication to this craft is impressive. And a couple of things I want to ask you is, so Saturday is so busy. You're playing every slate, which is crazy for me to think about. Are you building any lineups on Friday? Or are you just building throughout the day and not being able to watch much of the games? Like how does the lineup building, because obviously you have all the news coming in, you have to tweak things, but I'm just curious of the lineup building, where that fits in and how it's spread out.
Usually I'll have most of my projections and everything done on Friday. And I like to do, it's another kind of silly thing, but I like to do all of my projections kind of at the same time. And so, I don't like to start on Thursday and then pick them back up on Friday and whatever. So Friday I'll do projections. I won't actually start building probably until like an hour before main slate lock, like something like that. And usually there's news and stuff where it's like I could build on Friday, but my lineups are probably going to change. Maybe you're getting anchored to certain players, like just different stuff like that, where it's why bother until the slates. So when the slates are going on, I'm not really watching games. I don't mind watching the box scores, which is maybe a little bit silly, but in terms of like actually watching the games, especially on a Saturday, there's just so much going on that I just can't really do it.
So all day Saturday, right? Like college football season, you're out of commission on Saturdays and you're a young guy. I don't know
Yeah.
what your personality is like, your social life, whatever, but that means from August or September until through what, end of December, maybe January some, you're not doing anything on Saturdays. People invite you out, you're not going out, I assume. So how have you balanced that? How have you handled that? How do you tell people, yo, I'm working all day on Saturday, and how do they respond?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a challenge. And even it bleeds into Friday too, because you're waking up somewhat early on Saturday.
Right.
You want to sleep well Friday to Saturday. And so yeah, it's definitely a challenge to talk to people about that. And like my friends are pretty good where it's like, they understand it. And for the most part, it's, after a long day of college football, I don't want to go out, but like, sometimes I'll make an exception and whatever. But yeah, actually I have kind of a funny story where there was a college football Saturday on Halloween, and me and my friend were hosting Halloween at my house. So I was like grinding all day. I don't know if it was just a crazy news day or like whatever, but got to the end of it and I was just super wiped, like just so tired. And people were starting to come to the party, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna take a quick nap. And the quick nap turned into like, I'm not going to my own party at my house. So it's definitely a challenge, which I thank my friends for putting up with it a little bit, because you're 23, 24, 25, like, and you want to go out on Saturday, like it's fun.
Yeah. So do you think it's worth it? All the pros that you find in your career, do you think it's worth missing out on these Saturdays in the fall?
Yeah, I would say so. I've thought about sort of that question a lot. I always arrive at like I wouldn't change anything, and especially once you kind of get into the swing of it, and your friends sort of know about it, your family sort of knows like, oh, it's Saturday, like Eric's busy, then it's fine. But it is hard, sort of turning down some of those invites. And I think also what makes it especially hard is you turn some of those invites down to like work all day and then lose money. And it's like, oh, I just didn't spend time with my friends or my family and I lost money. Like,
Yeah. Was this even worth it?
brutal. Right? Yeah. So yeah, it definitely gets challenging, but overall, I'd say definitely don't regret anything.
Yeah. So how does this impact your love life, relationships? Are you in a relationship? And if so, how does it affect it? If not, how has it affected it?
Yeah, so actually, I've been dating my girlfriend for about a month, so like fairly new.
So
She
she hasn't seen
no,
falls.
she hasn't seen the fall yet, which we've talked about it a bit, but yeah, I mean it's definitely challenging, and like I said, like being able to say no to something where it's like, oh, like let's hang out, and going through the slate, losing money, like that's just it's that like mentally is just a battle where it's like, oh, I could hang out with my girlfriend, or like I could play DFS, which sometimes like that's a choice. So yeah, definitely a challenge, and going through university and like playing seriously was difficult, because Friday nights, you're a university student, like, so yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's hard to find people that get it a little bit. There's been some people where it's like, that's weird, like what the hell. But yeah, so I don't know, it's definitely it challenges any relationship, really.
No, it does. And that person has to be super understanding. And again, you're only a month in, so you're not going to know for sure. But like you said, setting those expectations and having that communication is super important. And so you mentioned your friends a couple of times, and I don't know your relationship with your parents, or I guess the best way to phrase this question, for people whose opinions you value that are close to you in your life, what are their thoughts on your decision of graduating university and saying, I'm doing this full time instead of going out and getting a real job?
Yeah, well, I'll start with my parents, who like I have a great relationship with my parents, and they weren't fans at the start.
They never are.
Yeah, like the first conversation I had with them about it, they were pretty keen to kind of like put the brakes on and whatever. And I think I was in somewhat of a unique situation where, I had made some money sort of through university. I sort of used that as like, oh, now I just kind of have extra runway once I graduate. And then eventually, it turned into more of like an actual job and everything. But yeah, so they really weren't fans at the start, and then kind of came around to it. And I don't know, once I showed them what I was doing and kind of, I guess, opened the book a little bit. Here's what I'm doing. I'm not just throwing money away on a whim in terms of like gut feel or whatever.
Right.
Then they sort of understood it more. My friends are cool with it now. Actually, I didn't tell them for quite a long time, which I just like, you're in university, and I felt like I couldn't talk about it in a way that wasn't like somewhat braggy, and I needed to like justify what I was doing. But the only way to justify that is to be like, hey, look at this money I won. So yeah, I took quite a long time to tell them sort of what I was doing. But once I did, I mean, you figure out like, oh yeah, these are my best friends because like they want me to succeed. And so I told them, and yeah, everyone was happy. And and I mean, like I said earlier too, it's they put up with me in the falls and the winters, not being around as much. And
there are a couple of things there, and the biggest thing is, one, having that support is huge, right? Parents, friends, family, whatever.
Absolutely.
That's massive to have that. So consider yourself lucky that I'm sure you realize that's incredibly important. But two, getting people on board usually goes one of two ways. It's either after you have not necessarily one big hit, but generally a second big hit, because anyone can say, oh, that's lottery style. He got lucky. He did that. But then you show consistently, I've won 100K again, or I've won six figures again, or 50K again. So, okay, maybe he's actually doing something repeatable. But I think primarily, and it's what you just mentioned, is that people see you in action. They see your process. They see that you treat this like a job. They see that you have a routine. They see that you have benchmarks that you're working towards. And that, to a lot of people, can legitimize it in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. It is also a little bit funny because there's a little bit of like when you're telling people, and friends versus family or whatever, like my friends are around my age, and so I tell them I play DFS, like they think that's sweet, and they they get it right away.
Right.
They're like they're kind of in, they just understand it more versus I'm telling my aunt or my uncle, and they're kind of like, sports gambling, like what?
Yeah. How do you explain it to them? Do you just like, what is your, whether it's extended family or people you meet out in the world, what is your go-to explanation?
I mean, so usually I'll start with just like, I bet on sports full time.
You just go right in for it.
And then, yeah, I used to kind of beat around the bush a little bit. But now, I don't know, I'm just like, they're going to find out eventually. Like, I might as well just tell them. But yeah, I'll go with a bet on sports full time. Usually I'll do some sort of like, I'm like running sims to compare this and this. And then if they're sort of into it or understand more, then I'll try and go into some of the differences between DFS and sports betting and just try and branch it off of there. But yeah, I feel like sports betting is a little bit more like accessible for just like the common person. Sure. And it's essentially what we're doing. So
yeah, a little easier to explain that, I guess. And if they want to press for more questions, you can always answer those, right? So going back, you said you're fanatical about your sleep, and obviously that means there is some balance to your work and your lifestyle. What other tactics do you use to balance your lifestyle? Because I'm a sleuth over here, Eric, and I did some digging, and I found a local Regina newspaper that said you're part of a legendary family relay team. So when we were communicating before the show, you mentioned you threw in there running, and I said, well, there's got to be the same family. So clearly running's a big part of your life, or has been a big part of your life. So how does that mix in?
Yeah, no, it's something, my dad, he's a big runner. He's run Boston like 3 times. And then actually last week he just did his second Ironman. So,
Jesus.
He's deep into that world. My sister, she was like maybe a top 10 distance runner in Canada and university. So
Wow.
like, just, I guess it runs in the family.
Oh man, come on. You could have avoided that point.
But yeah, so I mean, actually, I played hockey in high school, like pretty competitively. Before that was in a track club and was running pretty frequently, but hockey was kind of it through high school. And then it just, it always kind of seems to come back to running where you get into university and it's like, I'll just go outside for a run. And so, I mean, definitely I'm a casual runner compared to my dad and my sister, but it's almost like meditation for me, honestly. Like getting outside, usually I don't wear headphones when I run, get outside into fresh air, into nature a little bit. And it's just kind of you and your thoughts and, you're working through a 45-minute run or whatever.
I was actually going to ask you that if you wear headphones or not, because I know a lot of successful people don't, and they just want to collect their thoughts and just be immersed in the experience. Whereas some of us, like me, who absolutely cannot stand running, have to have something on to distract you from it. So you're on that first side of things. You think that helps you, whether it's just collect your thoughts or balance or whatever. But clearly, you think that's helpful, just being out there without headphones.
Yeah, I think it just kind of like meditation. You're just out there. Just getting outside, swinging a little bit. And I guess it's also just like a complete disconnect from sitting at your computer or, like bringing your phone or whatever, where it's like, okay, I'm going for a run. I'm completely disconnected. Like I have the outside world basically, and I have my thoughts. So
it's huge to get that disconnect, especially when you're in front of the screen for so long, as long as we are. So, Eric, I'll let you get out of here. Let's transition here, and we'll talk about the future a little bit. And when we were messaging to set this up, you mentioned the words burnout a couple of times. And I think anyone who's done this for a living or any high stress, high investing, risk reward profession has probably experienced this to some extent. Hell, I mean, a lot of people out there would just what we would consider normal jobs experience burnout after they have a string of rough days. So, how often have you felt burnout? What do you think generally leads to that feeling? How do you combat it? And I guess ultimately, do you think that will be the cause of you to change careers?
I would say that the burnout for me kind of comes just like an accumulation of the days. And so it's doing the same thing over and over and over. It's like, how many times can I start this box score? And how many times can I, figure this out? And of course, like with the variance in the results too, like it's a lot easier to keep going and keep grinding day after day if you're doing like extremely well. And so actually I went back and I think 2020, that was kind of the most burnout I'd felt. And it was, obviously like league and sort of like the summer sports, but then we got back into NBA, which I was playing. So I played the bubble NBA, and then that launched right into college football and college basketball. And so it was just like the whole of 2020 into 2021, I was just like roasted. And so, for combating that, that's kind of when I decided to build my CFL website. Like I wanted to learn something that I could use, but it wasn't like directly tied to money and something that I need to worry about, sort of like that. And then, getting outside, running, trying to kind of step away from the computer and getting out of my head a little bit. I did lots of camping last summer, which was also nice. Just again, like a nice disconnect from phones, computers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're up there in Canada. You get a lot of great camping spots, right? I'm sure some beautiful spots up there. So, Eric, you're still young, right? What do you want to do in the future? You mentioned this has an expiration date. So, whenever that date comes, do you have an idea of, hey, I would like to do this in the future, or here's an area I would like to explore? Any thoughts, or are you just going to just see what comes to you?
I think I'm going to see what comes to me. I think long term, I'd like to start some sort of business, which could be in any sector, honestly. I've toyed with the idea of doing something with like a sports team again, but I think like, I don't know, coming from DFS where you have such input and such control over everything, and then going to a sports team where it's like you kind of have to build your way up to get to be a decision maker essentially, just isn't 100% what I want to do. So I'd say, I don't know, just start some sort of business, but yeah, pretty much just kind of take it as it all comes and roll with punches.
You seem like a smart dude and you have a great process, so I'm sure you'll have success in whatever you choose, Eric. So I'm curious to see what the future lies for you. So let's finish up with some final advice. I ask every guest these two questions. Eric, what do you think is the most important skill to have in being a DFS pro?
So I would say critical thinking. I think there are lots of different ways that people win money in DFS, just in terms of pros. Some are obviously heavily programmatic, whereas others, it's more of like aggregation and that sort of thing. But being able to like critically think about a problem, coming up with a solution, and then I guess like being honest with yourself to figure out if that solution actually works. I think those are sort of the skills to have, because there's lots of different ways to arrive at the answer, but to be able to evaluate the answer and tie it back to the problem, that's kind of, I think, where the sauce is a little bit.
I think that's a great way to explain it. And we talked about the expiration date and whether that's for the industry itself or just for you personally. People are going to have to face that if they're making this decision. But there are tons of people out there listening to this podcast that want to become a DFS pro. They want to quit their day job and they're playing maybe somewhat seriously now, or they're not even playing that seriously, but they aspire to be that. What would you tell someone who wants to be a DFS pro?
I would say just work hard and be realistic with it. I think that honesty to yourself is really what will tell you. And if you can truly evaluate what you're doing, be honest with, is this working? Is this not working? I think that you can do well in it. So.
Well said, sir. So I'll give you the floor now. Any final thoughts? Anything we haven't talked about? Anything you want to promote? The floor is yours, my friend.
No, not really. I just want to say, like, again, I think that this podcast, obviously I've listened to it a bunch. It's been fantastic. Just in like, sometimes in DFS and everything, you feel a little bit alone in like, I'm going through this downswing or whatever. And so, yeah, this podcast has been great, where you learn that like, oh, it's like Osimo went through this 700K downswing. And then like, so yeah, all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, other than that, no, don't really have anything to promote.
Cool. Well, Eric, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate you reaching out and stepping out and not being a ghost anymore. So as always, I think a lot of the people who listen to this will appreciate that as well. So for Eric, I'm Brian. Appreciate everyone listening, and talk to you soon.